Hello, friends. It's day 3 of the World Series of Poker main event. I have quite a lot of chips. I actually might have been the chip leader of the entire tournament at this point. I think that after winning that Aces versus Kings hand, I was, which is pretty exciting. Quick reminder of strategy here as the bubble approaches, and let's talk a minute about where we are relative to the bubble. So we've played 4 hours of day 3 so far. There's about 6 hours to play until we're going to make the money. You know, we didn't know it was going to be exactly that, but that's a rough guess how long we're going to get there. If you assume that we're playing something like 25 hands an hour, probably we'll get to be closer to like 15 to 20 hands per hour as the bubble approaches, because people start playing more slowly, sometimes with good reason, sometimes just because they're stalling. But you know, we're going to play somewhere in the neighborhood of like 120 to 150 hands until we are at the bubble. So that means that people are going to need to survive like 12 to 15 orbits in order to make the money. You know, for shorter stacks who are thinking in those terms, like if you don't have a stack where you're going to be able to fold or mostly fold for 15 orbits and make the money, then you're definitely going to have to take some risks. And then, you know, if you have so many chips that you can afford to take some risks and still make the money, you know, like the situation that I'm in, that's great. And the medium stacks are often the one, like the people who, if they lose a substantial pot, then they're going to be in danger of bubbling. But if they just mostly fold and only play when they have really good hands, then they're probably going to make the money. Those are the people who are the best targets for bullying. And there start to be more and more people who fall into that category as you get closer and closer to the bubble. But this is what we've been waiting for. This is what I preserved my big stack for, was so that I could start pressuring people. I get moved to a new table immediately after that Aces versus Kings hand. I recognized Aaron Pinson, who's a player I know from the Maryland area. There were a few decent to good players on my left, but they all had shortish stacks, so those were not big threats to me. And then there was a player in some ways similar to Fabrizio from the previous table, in that, you know, he had a lot of chips and was playing a lot of pots, but he was a much less good player than Fabrizio. But he still had the problem of, you know, his weaknesses as a player were mostly related to his being too reckless. You know, he's the sort of person I would love to be sitting 300 big blinds deep with in a cash game. In a tournament, I don't want to be playing 300 big blind pots, and he was, I mean, not that we're really going to play, I don't want to be playing 100 big blind pots. And so I know that he's going to force a lot of big pots, or, you know, I quickly learned he was going to force a lot of big pots. And so I had to be careful about the way that I approached him. You know, I did have more chips than he did. I wanted to take advantage of that. At the same time, you know, I want to not take too many big risks. I want to preserve my stack. We both want to be bullying the bubble. Fortunately, we were across the table from each other, so it's not like we were constantly butting heads, but you'll see that I'm very careful in the way that I approach him, especially after the first couple of hands. Under the gun 2 opens 9K. I call with Jack 6 suited in the big blind and immediately flop a flush because that's how I run. I checked and called a bet of 9K. I think raising is better, though. I talked about this in the previous in the previous installment, where I was saying, like, with the low flush draw, I was better off fast playing it, and with a big flush draw, or sorry, with a low flush, I was better off fast playing it, and with big flush cards, you're better off slow playing. This is obviously a little bit bigger than Deuce 4, and the Jack is kind of a relevant card, but yeah, I mean, I still think, like, my opponent can very easily have the ace or the king of diamonds in his hand, and although there are a couple of diamonds, you know, like if he has the ace of diamonds and you get like the king or the 8, that's going to be pretty sweet for me. But in general, I mean, there's just a lot of hands that can give me action if I fast play. A lot of ways he can have a flush draw, a lot of ways he could have a setter or 2 pair. So I think there's a pretty strong case for check raising here. I think part of the reason I didn't actually was that, because of the kind of like bubble considerations, I thought he might actually, you know, fold more than usual. I mean, he should fold more than usual to a check raise. But I mean, that also means he's going to pot control more than he should on the turn. I mean, the board kind of ended up running out in a way that wasn't great for me. I mean, I'm still going to value bet the river. I'm probably just going to fold to a raise. Fortunately, he did not raise and I won, but I think raising the flop would be the better play here. The big stack, the guy with 900K, He opens, I guess that should be 8K that he opened to. I called ace 10 off in the small blind, and we get the ace queen 6 rainbow flop. I think in retrospect, this is not a hand that, I mean, it's a fine call generically, like small blind versus hijack, but I think being so deep out of position against this player, if I'm folding, or not folding, but I mean, if I'm flatting kings in the big blind to Fabrizio, I probably just want to be folding ace 10 offsuit in the small blind. Anyway, I ended up just check calling him down, which I think is a pretty straightforward thing to do. I wasn't that happy about calling the river, but I think I probably chop sometimes, and I didn't really know a lot about this player. If he is ever bluffing here, obviously, it's going to be a mistake to fold. And he has ace queen, so it's pretty lucky flop for him. But I think this is like part of why I should just fold the ace 10 pre-flop. If I'm in position, it's a different story. But being out of, not that it would have saved me money in this case, but it's just not the hand you want to be playing out of position when you're 300 big blinds deep. It doesn't have nuttiness. We've talked a lot about that. So I'm down to 1.25 million, barely 300 big blinds. Fuck my life. Under the gun 2 now has a million, opens to 9K. I make it 30K with ace king offsuit. I have position this time, so I'm a little more willing to inflate the pot against him. I also know he's opening way too many pots, so it's a lot of value in 3-betting this hand, whether he calls or folds. He does call, and the flop it's deceptive. It's tempting to look at this and think, oh, what a good flop. I've got a gut shot, I've got 2 overcards, I've got a backdoor flush draw. Most of those aren't nutty. The 2 overcards in particular are, like he's often going to have hands like ace jack, ace 10, king 10, king queen, the kinds of hands where even if I make my hand or even if I make my pair, it's still not going to be good. So the overcards are definitely not great here. The queens are very good cards. Like, queens, 3 of them are literally nut out. So, I mean, those are very good cards. And then the backdoor spades is good, but it would be better if I had the ace of spades rather than the king of spades. I don't think betting the flop would be awful, but I think with 2 Broadway cards on the board, the likelihood of his having some kind of hand he can continue with is very, very high on the flop. So I think if you're going to bet the flop, you need to be prepared to like barrel a run out like this one. And I don't think that's just the kind of thing, that's the sort of high variance thing I don't want to be doing right now. So I think betting the flop is really only going to be profitable if you're going to follow through on blank runouts, which I didn't want to do. The other merit of betting the flop would be to get folds from hands like 9s, 8s, and 7s, but you don't have to bet the flop to get those folds. You can check the flop and still bet a later street, and it's still going to be hard for those hands to call. And that is how I would play. I mean, it's probably how I'd play like aces and kings. It's probably how I would play ace 10. So it's not like I can't have value hands after checking the flop. I also don't want to get check raised on the flop and have to fold my equity. After checking back the flop, he makes a less than half pot bet on the turn. There are bluffs here that he can be betting king, queen, ace, queen, 9-8, maybe worse than that. I block some of his spade draws, but not all of them. So I think this is a call. So I'm not thrilled about it. And then on the 8 of spades river, I mean, when he bets 30K, it's like, it's hard to imagine. I mean, you don't see bluffs here that often for 30K. At the same time, you don't want to fold too much when you're getting better than 5-1 on a call. Like I felt like I didn't have enough experience with this player to just soul read say, he just always has it when he bets 30K here. So I paid him off knowing that I was probably going to be paying him off. He had pocket 6s, which I think he should win more money than this when he has to. Like, that's the upside of his using the small sizing is he wins a little bit more when I have a particularly bad hand like this one, but he's not getting anywhere near the maximum out of me when I have the stronger part of my range. And I think overall this sizing is less good for him, even though it worked out well for him in this case because I had the hand that pays him off for a small size and not for a big size. Below 300 big blinds. Under the gun 1 opens 9K. Under the gun 2 calls. I call with queen jack offsuit in the cutoff just because I'm trying to get in a lot of pots right now, but I think folding would be a perfectly fine thing to do. Big blind calls as well. I flop a gutter, but with this many people in the pot, I don't think that's enough nuttiness to justify bluffing a flop like this one that's so easy for people to get a piece of. Bingo on the turn, checks around to me. I definitely want to be building the pot in some kind of way. There's probably a case for betting larger here. I wouldn't be surprised if it's a mix at equilibrium. but I bet 15K and get called only by Under the Gun 1, which is, of all the players who could call me, probably the best one. Like, he is the most likely to have, certainly to have sets. 2 pairs, probably more in his range than anyone else's, at least the best 2 pairs. So, on the river, I want to go for substantial value. There maybe is even a case for betting bigger than this, but I got paid off for a decent amount. Back to 300 big blinds, Under the Gun 2, who has only like 45, is that right? Yeah, 45 blinds to start the hand. He opens to 9K. I call with King 8 suited on the button. Another, slightly loose call, not terribly loose. And if I'm thinking that I'm going to be able to exert a bit of extra pressure after the flop, then it would make sense to call. I think folding this flop isn't really consistent with calling pre-flop. Like, if I'm thinking I'm going to be folding to a less than half pot bet when I have a flop like this one, then I probably should just fold pre. Like, the whole reason to call pre is so that I can pressure this player, and this seems like an opportunity to do that, whether by calling or raising. So I probably should either do one of those things or fold pre-flop. Under the Gun limps. I chose to limp behind with Jack 9 of hearts. Under the Gun was a good player. This isn't like a fishy limp. So I'm not really interested in building a pot with Jack 9. The downside of limping is something like this happens. That a player can make a big raise behind you, and it's hard not to be capped in this situation. You could try to limp behind here with aces or something, but usually you're not going to have that good of a hand. I actually ended up calling the raise. So to call, I'm risking 31K to win. I'm not getting quite 2-1, but it's not too far off from 2-1. I think Jack 9 suited has pretty resilient equity against a wide range, and I do think it's plausible that small blind is on kind of a wide range here. So I peeled, and I got a reasonably good flop. The thing that's a little worrisome is I am going to be behind ace-jack when a queen turns. So this would be a much closer decision if I didn't have the backdoor hearts. With the backdoor hearts, I think it's a call. My hand is an okay candidate for betting when checked to. I certainly have 9-8 suited. That's not a straight. Never mind. I think I need to bluff at some point. If I don't do it on the turn, I need to do it on the river. The river may be the better time to do it because I'm representing a much more nutty hand by betting the turn than I would be by checking back the turn and betting the river. And it's kind of hard for me to have really nutty hands here. So I think checking the turn and betting the river might be the better line. But regardless, I need to bet at some point. I shouldn't just be checking down jack high and losing to ace high. For a guy who talks big about pressuring the bubble, I've not really been applying the pressure in these examples. I limp 7-6 suited Under the Gun. I don't think we've seen me do a lot of open limping yet, but now that I'm in this mode of trying to play more pots, I may try to introduce it a little bit more at least. So once we get closer to the bubble, I'm going to have a lot more incentive to raise. Right now, I don't think people are feeling that much pressure from pre-flop raises. It's more going to be some post-flop stuff that's going to put pressure on people. So I just want to be in more pots, and this is a hand that's pretty borderline to open Under the Gun, so I think limping, it's a fine candidate for limping. End up getting heads up against the big blind. He checks to me, and I just decided to go for like a zero equity 3 street. I guess on the theory that I hadn't been applying that much pressure after the flop, I decided I was going to change that. So, I just went ahead and started betting right away on the flop, which is not that bad because the big blind's range is really weak here relative to mine, but my hand does not have nuttiness to it really. So pretty dicey whether I want to build a pot from the flop, and then, turn and river is just like, it looks like a favorable run out for me. It might have worked if he hadn't rivered 2 pair. I don't know. I told myself that I just got unlucky that he rivered 2 pair, but this is definitely a getting out of line thing to do. I think this is an okay time in the tournament to get out of line, and I'm still maintaining I might have just been unlucky that he rivered 2 pair. But, people are allowed to river 2 pair. That's part of the game, and you are going to lose pots to them when you just go bonkers with nothing. Under the Gun 1 opens 10K. I call a 9-7 suited on the button. We've talked a lot about some of these calls I'm making right now. Finally get some post-flop pressure to work. I flop an open-ended straight draw, I raise a small c-bet, and take it down. That's how this is supposed to go. I call under the gun 1 when I have 8s in the cutoff. Big blind calls. I flop an overpair, so I'm peeling under the gun 1s. Flop bet. There is a little bit of a case for raising the flop, but not a strong one. I'd be more inclined to do it if he weren't betting into 2 people, but he should have a somewhat stronger range when he's betting into 2 people. So I just called, and then the ace is an awful turn. I mean, it's the worst turn for my hand. He can still have some bluffs here, and he should be firing when he has stuff like king, queen, and king, jack, but I'm not that inclined to peel him with 8s. So that's the end of that level. Now we're getting a lot closer to the bubble. Now we have 4 hours to go until the bubble. I think I talked about most of this stuff already, actually. The main thing is that I do want to find some opportunity to pressure the other big stack. I know that he's playing too many hands. I know that he's not that good of a player. I just have to be careful about how I do it, and I really have to focus on nuttiness. On when I do come after him, making sure that I have a decent draw in a hand that if I make it, I'm going to feel good about it. If he plays back at me, I'm going to know that I can call early streets and not have tough decisions on later streets. Like either I miss or I get there and I feel good about my hand when I get there. That's what I'm looking for when I play a big pot with the other big stack. But it's going to have to happen eventually. He's in too many pots, and there's just too many opportunities for me to pressure him. Like there's too many chips to be made by pressuring him by not doing it. So to not do it, I just need to make sure that the situation is right. So we're at 25. 50-50. I have 200 big blinds, small blind limps. I make a kind of sizable raise with a 7 offsuit in the big blind, which I think is a great hand for doing this. It's a hand that has a very good blocker, a hand that's going to have perfectly fine equity against this calling range, but also a hand that benefits a lot from folds and from taking it pre-flop, because it's not a hand that plays that well after the flop. It's also not a hand that minds getting limp re-raised. It'll be a trivial fold if I'm limp re-raised, whereas if I had like Jack 7 suited, that's a hand where I'm a lot more interested in seeing the flop. It's going to have more post-flop playability. It's going to be doing less well against his limp calling range. And I think I'll actually be less, I mean, I'm going to fold it to a limp re-raise, but I'm going to be less happy about that than folding a 7 offsuit. So this is, I think, exactly the kind of hand to do this with, and it works. So we can see that we're approaching the bubble now because I'm opening 9 deuce suited. In this case, I thought, small blind just had a stack where he shouldn't be trying to play too many pots with me right now. Like he's got a fold into the money stack, but not a take risks stack. And the big blind was just nitty. So I opened here and won. Folds to me in the cutoff. I opened with 10-7 suited, and the player on my left who had 24 big blinds, he jams. This is fine. I mean, it's obviously a fold, but what I mean by fine is this is why you can be opening late, or why I can be opening wide here, is for him to enter a pot at all, he's got to commit 24 big blinds, or be aware that like 24 big blinds are on the line. So I'm risking 2 big blinds, and I'm putting him to a 24 big blind decision. And to some degree, I'm putting the player who's now the button, who's the small blind last hand, to some degree, I'm putting him to a 40 big blind decision. I mean, it's not like he can't put money in the pot and then fold, but he's going to feel the pressure of 40 big blinds and the pressure of the bubble anytime that he gets involved with me. I mean, 10-7 suited is a reasonable cutoff open anyway. It's not 9 deuce on the button. But, the fact that small blind can do this, like he needs a hand to do this. He's risking 24 big blinds. He's risking elimination on the bubble. He's not going to do this at a high frequency. He's just going to do this when he gets lucky and gets dealt a hand. And, if he gets dealt a hand, he gets dealt a hand. That's fine. You can certainly beat me by making strong hands. I'm just trying to play in a way where making strong hands is the only way to beat me. I open 10K with king queen off in hijack. I get shoved on again. This player I did call. I think if you think about how wide I'm opening right now. Just based on, not that I even showed down those last 2 hands, but I'm going to have, and you'll see going forwards, I'm going to have a very wide opening range. King Queen is actually pretty close to the top of my opening range. I'm not thrilled to be putting in 27 big blinds with it, but clearly I can dominate hands that he's jamming. I mean, I'm lucky that he had this and not like ace queen, but he has incentive to shove hands like this because I'm opening really, really wide. And when you're opening wider, you should recognize that at least better players behind you are going to shove a little wider against you, and consequently you should call a little wider. And this also, I mean, there's a little bit of like message sending to the rest of the table of, if you jam on me, I might call you with king queen. And even if you have like pocket nines or something, that's real bad for them. Even if they have ace jack, that's real bad for them. Like if he shoves here with ace jack, it's a disaster for him to get called by king queen. Even though he's slightly ahead, just getting eliminated right now is a disaster. So hopefully this will deter future people from playing back at me a little bit. The big blind was away, so I opened king four offsuit in the low jack, and I get called by that big stack on the button. I'm not looking to play pots with him. I have a very bad hand, so I'm not even putting another penny into the pot. I just check the flop and check fold to the turn. Like the reason I raised this was to steal the pot pre-flop. When that didn't work and I didn't flop anything, I'm just done. You're not, just because you bluff one street doesn't commit you to keep firing. I expected pre-flop to be a very profitable spot. It probably was a very profitable spot. If it doesn't work, it doesn't work. You're allowed to cut your losses. You're supposed to cut your losses. Under the gun 2 opens 11K. I call Jack 10 offsuit in the big blind, flop top pair. We both check the flop, and then I just go for value in two streets. I'm fortunate that nothing bigger than a jack came, but these are very clear value bets. There's no reason to check the turn. There's no reason to bet small. You have as many bluffs as you want, right? As a big blind caller, you can bluff here as much as you want. So you should be using big sizing. He very rarely has a better hand than Jack 10, so you can treat Jack 10 as the nuts, at least until you get raised, and just bet a polarized range on two streets, use big sizing. It's pretty straightforward stuff. I limp 10-7 offsuit in the small blind, and the 40 big blind stack checks. I flop a gut shot and a backdoor flush draw. There's certainly a case for betting the flop here, but I also don't expect the villain to bet too much when I check to him. This is a flop that's very favorable for me as the small blind limper. The small blind limper should have a stronger range than the big blind. There are hands that I'm folding from the small blind, so I don't have the weakest hands in my range the way he does. And there's also, he presumably is going to raise when he has stuff like aces, jacks, nines, ace king, ace jack. I could limp any of those hands. So I have a pretty significant advantage on this board, both equity-wise and in terms of who's going to have the nuts. But there's a lot of hands I don't want to bet here. I'm not that interested in betting a jack. I'm not that interested in betting a 9, especially if it's a 9 with an overcard like 10-9 or queen-9. I'm not real interested in betting those hands. So I can have a range that checks flop and bluffs turn. I want to have a range that checks flop and bluffs turn. This would be a reasonable hand for just betting the flop also, because it already has some nuttiness on the flop. The very best hands for a line like this would be something like 7-8, where I don't have a lot going on the flop, and then I turn and open-ended straight draw. That would, or like even 5-7 or something, those would be the even better candidates for this line. But I think my hand's a reasonable candidate for it also. I mean, it's not that nutty. The 8 doesn't give me the nuts. The backdoor club draw is only to the third nuts. So, it's not like I had, queen 10 here. Open 10K with Jack 8 suited in the hijack, called by small blind and big blind. Bottom pair versus two people on a pretty scary board, not one where I have any interest in betting. The ace, I could try to represent it, but there's a real chance that one of my opponents has it, or that they're just not going to believe me. When they know that you're playing a lot of hands pre-flop, they're not going to give you a lot of credit after the flop. So I don't think this is a time to, and they also should be doing more checking with like good but not great hands, because they don't want to play large pots right now. So they should be a little more inclined to check hands that in different situations they might bet, and that means their checking ranges are just a little bit stronger. So I'm not trying to force them out pre-flop, especially small blind. He's got to have a hand that he's somewhat serious about to call me pre-flop. So when I get called pre-flop, I'm just going to try to take whatever showdown value I have and fold to a river bet. Open 10-5 suited in the cutoff, big blind calls. Very similar scenario here to the previous hand, even though it's heads up. Again, I flop bottom pair in a spot where I think I'm not going to make better fold. I'm not going to get called by worse, not on the flop or the turn. On the river, I decided I probably had the best hand and tried to bet for value. He ended up having ace-6. I think his line is fine, actually. And it just goes to the point of, at a different phase of the tournament, you might see him playing this hand aggressively on the turn or river and betting it. But at this phase of the tournament, it's not surprising that he's checking it instead. And I mean, possibly my value bet on the river was a little ambitious. It's small enough, though. I think I can get called by like king high or small pairs. Open 10K with ace 3 off in the cutoff, called by the big blind. I flop bottom pair again, but this time it's bottom pair on a board where there's a much better chance that bottom pair is good, and also bottom pair needs a lot more protection than it did on those previous boards. So I do bet this time. It's a small bet. I get called. We both check the turn, and then he folds an ace river. Under the gun one opens 13K, hijack calls, and I call with 3s in the cutoff, and then the big blind calls. Don't have any incentive to bet 3s on this flop. Turning a full house is nice. Hijack bet 16K, and we must have been, he must have had at least a couple 100,000 here that I'm, interested in making. I mean, this isn't that huge of a raise. It's about a pot-sized raise on the turn, but I'm if he only had 120K, I wouldn't make a raise this large because I wouldn't need to get all the money in. So I think he probably has at least like 300K if I'm making this raise. If he has a 10, he's definitely not going anywhere. He's probably not going anywhere with a king. The hands that would call smaller raises but aren't calling this would be draws. And at this phase of the tournament, he probably shouldn't be peeling raises with draws anyway. Because, for one thing, there's a possibility that I have a full house. And it's a more high variance thing to do. So I think it's kind of, he has a hand that he's going to call or he doesn't. And if he does, I think he's going to be willing to call a large raise. Under the gun one opens 12K. I call king queen suited in the hijack, and the button calls. I flop top pair and bet when checked to. I think it's very likely I have the best hand. There are second best hands that can pay me off. I have a little bit of interest in protection, but mostly I have a 3-street hand here. If they keep, I don't know why I'm saying hijack. Yeah, I'm the hijack, so I guess under the gun one is the what I'm calling hijack here. But yeah, I have a 3-street hand. As long as he's checking and calling, I'm going to keep value betting, and my hand is good enough to bet 3 streets on a blank run out, which it looks like we're getting a blank run out. 3 of hearts, obviously, also a mistake. It was probably the 3 of clubs or something. It's a lot of work to transcribe these hands, guys. But yeah, this is, you can't bet 3 streets if you don't bet the flop, and this is going to be a 3-street hand on a lot of runouts. Button opens 14K. I call king 6 off in the big blind. Slightly dicey, but as you know, I'm erring on the side of playing pots right now. Both check flop, both check turn. And this was funny, actually. This dealer was, for being like late day 3 of the main event, I understand on day 1C, the main event, when they have thousands of players, or during the big 50 they have thousands of players playing at a time, and it's going to be all hands on deck, and they're going to have to use some pretty inexperienced dealers. I was surprised that we had a dealer this poor on like late day 3 of the main event, but it was sort of funny. She didn't know how to read hands, like how to look at the board and really determine what the winning hand was, because for those who don't play a lot of live poker, what the dealers are supposed to do is when a hand goes to showdown, they're supposed to push forward the cards on the board that go along with your hand. So like in this case, what should have happened was she should have pushed forward the queen, the 10, and both 4s and left the 2 where it was, and that would indicate that the winning hand here is king, queen, 10, 4, 4, and then she would see that we both had that hand, and we would chop. That's what's supposed to happen. But this dealer just didn't know how to read hands. She just knew how to deal cards. So she would just push the entire board forwards every time, no matter, like if there was a showdown, she would just push all 5 cards on the board forward, which doesn't accomplish anything and defeats the point of doing it. But what happened here, she just kind of turned it over very quickly. She saw that he had king 8 and I had king 6, and then she turned the cards over and started pushing him the pot. And I barely even had time to look at his hand and think about the board to determine that we had a chop. So I had to sort of stop her and be like, no, wait, turn the cards over. I think that's a chop. And then, I had to show her that it was a chop. It's a little frustrating to have to fight for that, but I'm glad I did. Glad I got my half of that pot. I opened 12K with 9-6 suited under the gun, called by that big stack on the button, the small blind, and the big blind. And I finally get what I'm looking for. I got a lot of nuttiness on this flop, and it's a flop where I think it's going to be pretty hard for the button to actually have anything. I think this is one of those spots where he's going to have way too wide of a range pre-flop. He's probably going to bet the flop with way too wide of a range, and this is my opportunity to take advantage of him. I've got exactly the kind of hand that I want. It may not look like much. It may look like I just have a gut shot, but I block the nuts. I do have a gut shot, which is, that's a real value, and I have the backdoor flush draw. So what that means is, if he doesn't fold right away to my flop check raise, so I want to check to him and give him that opportunity to put too much money in the pot. It's a flop that I'm often going to check fold, so I want to have a check raising range as well. He has a lot of incentive to bet when checked to, in addition to, I think he's probably going to make the mistake of betting too wide, but he should be betting a lot when checked to. So I expect him to bet a lot when checked to, and then, I can make a sort of beefy raise on the flop if he calls. Not what I'm hoping for, but it's fine. I'm going to feel pretty good on a lot of turn cards. I'm going to feel good on a 9. I'm going to feel good on a 5. I'm going to feel good on any club. So I get the club. So my plan probably is to check fold turns that aren't those things, but I do get the king of clubs, so I continue betting with a big size. I'm representing a set. I'm representing that I flopped a straight, and I really could do those things. Even 2-pair, I think I could play this way, and I probably have like 4-3 suited and 7-4 suited in my range. Even though I'm opening under the gun, I have 9-6 suited. Like, it's not that far of a stretch to say I'd be playing 7-4 suited. So he's not going to have a hand that can stand up to this kind of pressure very often. So it felt good to finally implement the plan for taking that pot, or for pressuring that big stack. We're getting quite close to the money now. We're down to the last 2 hours of the day. So now we've got people who are stalling and just like really are going to be folding everything or damn near everything. And so now it's really just Steel City. This actually would be a great spot for me, even if I didn't have ace queen. Having ace queen made it easy, but it's just, under the gun opens to 15K. The player in the big blind is a very obvious stealing target. He gets called by that big stack. I guess it wasn't that guy, but anyway, he gets called by under the gun 1M by the cutoff, and I can just squeeze here. I honestly, I could probably make this play with any 2 cards. Under the gun said he folded pocket 9s, which he probably should. I was going to reluctantly, I probably wouldn't have called him. He's got 475K. I guess I would have folded. I shouldn't talk a big game like that. But, the one thing that's nice about having this hand is I am going to be priced in to call the cutoff if he shoves, but realistically, I don't think he's shoving very often. It's a pretty bad spot for him. I think the only player who can really have a hand here, I think, is under the gun. And maybe under the gun 1 could have a hand. I think he wants to 3-bet a lot, though, if he has something. He doesn't want to let me come into the pot in some capacity. So this, how much is in the pot at this point? There's 15, 30, 45 plus 15. There's like 60K in the pot, and I'm risking 90K. It's pretty good odds. I'm gonna need to succeed 60% of the time, I think, somewhere in that neighborhood. So I think that's pretty plausible that you're getting this through 60% of the time on the bubble, regardless of your cards. Definitely when you're blocking stuff like aces, queens, ace, king, the kinds of hands that people will feel okay about jamming. So, I was thinking this was going to be a good spot even before I looked at my cards. Now I looked at ace, queen. I was like, okay, yeah, we're going for this for sure. It's almost a shame. I don't remember. I guess I should have showed the ace, queen there, just because it's going to contribute to my image. I am stealing a lot of pots, and winning that is going to make it look like I'm stealing a lot of pots, even though ace queen was probably the best hand there. It was certainly like a legitimate re-raising hand. I definitely showed these queens. And I want people to know, like, oh, if you had gone for it, that would have been it for you. You want people to see those big hands, even if they know what you're doing. This is a Alex Fitzgerald point, actually. Even if people know what you're doing when you show them the cards, like they know that you're showing the cards because you're doing a lot of bluffing and you want them to see when you have strong hands, it's still hard for them to overcome that bias of seeing the cards and of thinking of like the times that you had strong hands. It's how brains work. They're going to be influenced by the cards that they actually see, and they're going to have sort of an emotional reaction of like, oh, thank God I didn't shove there. That would have been a really bad spot for me. And then the next time that they're thinking about shoving, they're going to have that like visceral memory of thank God I didn't shove that previous time. And that's what you're accomplishing by showing hands in these. I don't show hands often, but I think this is a time where you really do want to be showing your big hands because I want to be stealing like a maniac. But I'm getting good hands. So Under the Gun 2 opens to 12K. The Cutoff, who's the other big stack, calls, and I have ace-king suited in the big blind. So here, I mean, it would definitely be reasonable to squeeze, but I'm really not looking to have big confrontations with the Cutoff. And I think Under the Gun 2 raising into my big blind is also indicative of his having a pretty strong hand. So I think there's maybe not as much value in opening in squeezing ace-king suited here as it might seem. I decided to call and play post flop. Not the greatest flop for me, but facing a bet of less than half the pot. I mean, he can still have ace jack, king jack, some backdoor draw, jack 10 of diamonds or something. Like, he can have hands that I'm ahead of. I'm getting a pretty good price. He's going to struggle to bluff me. Like, one thing that's going to happen in this situation, I've talked a lot about using a big stack to pressure your opponents with aggression and with bluffs, but you also get to take more hands to showdown when you're on the bubble with the big stack because people are very reluctant to bluff you or to thin value bet you. So you realize a lot more of your equity than you would at a different phase of the tournament. Like, if he has queen jack here, there's a decent chance he's going to check back the turn, where he wouldn't do that at other phases of the tournament. So that means that at a different point in the tournament, when he has queen jack and I have ace king, I might call the flop and end up folding to a turn bet and never see a river that was going to be an ace or a king where I would have won the pot. So I'm not realizing all my equity in that situation. Here, if he bets queen jack on the flop and then the turn is a blank and he checks and the river is an ace or a king, now I'm getting more of my equity. I'm winning a pot that I wouldn't have won if he had bet the turn. And that's not that he's making a mistake by not betting the turn. He has to, worry. He doesn't want to play a big pot right now. But the upshot of it is I get to realize more of my equity. So even though I don't have a backdoor flush draw, I peel the flop, end up turning an ace. When he only bets 30K, I think it's very likely I have the best hand. So I decided to raise. I don't want him. If he's barreling with a gut shot, I don't want to give him a free card or flush draw, I guess. I also don't want to let him make what might just be a turn blocking bet. This could be king queen or something where he's just betting the turn, looking to check back the river because he's afraid if he checks the turn, I might bomb the river and put him in a bad spot. So it's kind of like a preemptive blocking bet. And I don't want to allow him to take a free showdown with the hands that want a free showdown. I want to put him in a spot where he has to put more money in the pot if he wants to go to showdown. Open 12K with king queen offsuit under the gun 1, and I'm called by my buddy in the big blind with 900K. And this time I flopped the right kind of nuttiness, not the backdoor flush draw gut shot kind, but the top two pair kind. He checks, and this is a board where I do want to at least sometimes have a bigger bet size. I also, for exploitive reasons, think if he has something, he's going to be reluctant to fold it, and so I can just use a bigger size and expect that he's going to not think a lot about my hand and just call when he has a piece of the board. This is an easy board to have a piece of. Even with the blocker effect of my hand, it's still an easy board to have a piece of. So I bet 20K. When he doesn't raise me on the flop, I feel very good about having the best hand. I think ace jack, jack 9, pocket 10s, those hands are mostly check raising the flop. So a nice blank card on the turn, and now I really want to be bombing away at it. In theory, this is a pretty good overbetting spot. I just thought in practice he might fold too much to an overbet, and overbetting is also a much more high variance thing. It's not high variance in the sense that it's increasing your likelihood of losing the pot, but it's high variance in the sense that I would rather get 75K paid off consistently than get 150K paid off half as often. Even though in theory those have the same expected value, whether you get 75K 50% of the time or 150K 25% of the time, those have the same EV. But it's lower variance to get the 75K paid off more often. Like, I'd rather win a small pot or a medium-sized pot consistently than a big pot rarely. That's sort of how tournaments work. So I just go for the modest pot-sized bet and get called. Now the turn is a beautiful thing. The turn, I make the full house, I make the nuts. He bets into me for 125K, and I raise an amount that's still, I'm still going to leave him about 300K behind if he calls this raise. But it's a pretty beefy raise. But I think, if he has a king, he's definitely never folding it. with a queen, yeah, I mean, maybe he's going to shrivel up once we started putting like 500k into the pot, but that could be true if I raised to 375k also. Like most of the strength of raising here, or most of the strength that you're projecting in this situation just comes from the fact that you're raising. The difference between raising to like 375 and 500, I think, is probably not going to affect his calling range all that much. It's going to look very strong to raise here no matter what amount I choose, and he may fold a queen even to a stronger raise. I think if he has a king, he's never folding. Of course, there's not that many kings left in the deck, but I mean, he just bet into me when the king paired on the river, so that is certainly an indication that he might have a king. I think it's not that great of a play with a queen. I think there's a decent chance his betting range on the river is just a king and missed draws. So if with a missed draw, he's never calling anything. And with a king, I think he's going to be willing to call a large raise anyway. So, I mean, now that I say it, like maybe there's a case for making it 600k or 700k. I want to leave him some money behind. I don't want him to feel like he's going to bubble if he calls the river raise. But I think 500k is a good amount. I feel good about this. And I felt good raking a nice large pot. So almost to 2 million chips. I opened 12k with 8-7 suited under the gun 1, small blind and big blind call. I flop a little bit of nuttiness in the form of a gut shot and 2 overcards. So I make a small c-bet, get called by only the big blind. Once again, just failing to put the pressure on here. You can't check down 8 high, and this is why you can't check down 8 high, because it feels like garbage to lose to 9 high. That was, I mean, it was sort of like I had won enough pots that we could just kind of like laugh about it and be, oh, someone else finally got one. And like, I mean, there's a little bit of a nice image thing of, like here's a spot where I probably should have bluffed and I didn't. But I mean, it's not to say this was a good play. I'm just looking to, make the best of a bad situation or look for the silver lining on a mistake or however you want to put it. But I definitely should be betting the river here. I think the turn is a fine check. Like he's showing a decent amount of strength by calling the flop. I don't have much of a hand to go barreling through on, but I think I need to bet the river it just didn't occur to me that he might have busted draws, and it obviously should have. I do block 7-6, but I unblock like king 3. I unblock all the spades, most of which I'm losing to. So when you have this little showdown value and your opponent can have 9 high, you really really need to bet something. It can be 15k. Like he's not calling 15k with 9 high, so it's not like you have to make a big bluff, but you need to bet something. Cutoff opens 17k versus the weak player in the big blind. In retrospect, I think this probably should be a 3-bet. I think the cutoff can probably open pretty wide here. I think he's going to be very reluctant to call a 3-bet right now. I think I should be 3-betting, but I just called and flopped a flush instead. Went for the small check raise on the flop because I'm not blocking the ace or jack of diamonds, and he folded. Hijack opens 12k, cutoff calls, and I call 8-6 suited on the button. Flop bottom pair, so we check it around. Turn is a bad card, but the cutoff's bet was real small. So I decided to peel it. I'm not sure that that's good. I mean, there are some draws he could be betting here, but not a whole lot. And even getting 4-1, like I'm not a 4-1 favorite to improve to beat a better pair than mine. I think folding here might just be the play, actually. Anyway, I made it into the money after that, so